Awesome. Sounds good. Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Allison Gacad. I'm an editor at Carbon Pulse, where I lead coverage of carbon markets and climate policy in the Americas out of Vancouver, British Columbia. And I'm really excited to moderate today's discussion on the Climate Aligned Finance Act with our esteemed panelists. I think that today's conversation feels incredibly apt. We find ourselves wrangling with our legacy energy systems that now face new geopolitical tests of uncertainty. And how we respond to climate change today amidst this is perhaps the crux of the matter. And I'm looking forward to hearing from our panelists who will shed light on the role of Canada's financial systems in doing so. Now, I'm dialing in from Singapore today, but recognize that many joining us live are based in Canada, which are historically the lands of numerous Indigenous peoples and nations. And as we discuss what the future of Canada looks like, or could look like, I invite you to reflect on the land on which you stand, to ground your thoughts on what may come ahead with the history that preceded your participation on this call today. Now, in more recent history, the Climate Aligned Finance Act was first introduced in 2022. It was a historical effort to align Canada's financial institutions with the country's climate commitments, recognizing that where and how capital was deployed ultimately led to what kinds of greenhouse gases were released into the atmosphere and precisely how much. Now, 2022 was a time of ambition in Canada's domestic climate policy landscape. It was the release of the country's emissions reduction plan for 2030, and it was 1 year after Canada's climate targets were enshrined into law, which was among a global first. But if we fast forward to today, 2026, we occupy a very different climate policy landscape. Canada isn't expected to meet its 2030 climate target and has rolled back what were once key policy measures, including the cap on oil and gas emissions and the consumer carbon price on fossil fuels. And while the country has still committed to advancing on its sustainable investment guidelines, also known as its sustainable investment taxonomy, experts say there still remain gaps in the enabling environment for this to take force. Today, March 24th, 2026, is the 4-year anniversary of the initial introduction of CAFA to the Senate. Many have advocated for the policy to become law, and the bill has been appreciated as a world-leading policy proposal for climate finance. There have been significant updates to the bill since it was first introduced, including its reintroduction into Canada's new parliament following the 2025 federal election. On this webinar, I'll be asking our panelists a series of questions around how the policy relates to a stable and climate-resilient economy in Canada today, what is new, and what we can expect next. There will be some time for question and answer from our audience at the end as well, so please hold on to your queries. Now, without further ado, I'd love to introduce our speakers. Joining us today, we have the Honorable Rosa Galvez, an independent senator for Quebec. We have Jessica Kelly, Senior Policy Advisor at the International Institute for Sustainable Development, and Julie Segal, Senior Manager of Climate Finance at Environmental Defence Canada. So I think the first question to start off, and I think to really set the ground, is really asking all of you, like, what is it about CAFA that's important now, and what path do you want to see forward for it?
Can I start? Yes.
Go ahead.
Or Allison, Jessica.
Oh, sure. I can kick it off. Yeah. So I sit within the Canada Energy Transitions team here at IISD. So I approach CAFA from an energy perspective. So please keep that in mind as I move through my comments. CAFA has, of course, broad applications if you're interested in adaptation or mitigation. But I come at it from that energy perspective. And certainly, Allison, as you alluded to, we're in another energy price spike due to geopolitics. Shipping and pricing of essential commodities is disrupted again. Prices are up at the gas station domestically again. Food price inflation is already being forecast again. This is a fossil fuel driven disruption, and we've been here before, and we're likely going to be here again unless we start doing things differently. As a consumer, I've personally had enough of it, but as a policy analyst and advisor, I can confidently say that Canada needs to get off this energy price roller coaster associated with fossil fuels and transition to a better way of doing things. Canada is risking carbon lock-in and significant stranded fossil fuel assets if we continue to double down on conventional energy sources. And CAFA really provides the policy scaffolding that our financial sector needs to start getting out of this fossil fuel investment rut or glut. CAFA, in that way, can help preserve Canada's financial reputation as we move through the energy transition. The Act may appear overly complex or broad at first glance, but a sober second look actually reveals its simplicity. It is essentially calling for federally regulated entities to align their business plans with national climate commitments and legislation. It calls for data and reporting to inform decision-making, transition planning. It calls for updated expertise to reflect climate realities. And it calls for enforcement of those rules to protect against things like greenwashing. These are not radical asks. This is a means to enforce the law of the land in a cohesive and concrete manner for the financial sector, which frankly has been sitting on the sidelines of emissions reductions planning in Canada.
Mhm. Okay, I think I'm going now. Thank you so much. Just want to thank my co-panelists and Environmental Defense for organizing this event. I feel so humble of all your support. So why is CAFA important now more than before? Well, the climate risk is not longer theoretical. When I started in this field, it was really very much theoretical. Now it is materializing and it's a financial reality. So ignoring climate risk today is a direct threat to economic stability. With respect to Canada, the Canadian financial system unfortunately is misaligned with our own climate commitments. So we have a bill that says we have to reach net zero 2050, but we are very far from that. And we cannot meet our climate goals if our financial system is working actually against the current. We know because of the geopolitical situation that the global capital is already shifting. You know, there is almost $2 trillion available for investment last year. And how much did it came to Canada? Very, very little. So without action, Canada risks losing investment and competitiveness. We also know that voluntary measures are not enough. I think that there is plenty of evidence that despite of a lot of commitments and pledges, the greenhouse gas emission remains high and we have not decoupled our economic growth from greenhouse gas emissions. So what gets disclosed voluntarily, unfortunately, can also be ignored. So CAFA creates accountability. So CAFA is about protecting Canadian savings and pensions. It's protecting our money. Climate risk equals a stranded asset, abrupt pricing that we just spoke about it, and financial instability. So CAFA is about safeguarding long-term financial security. What are the paths to get there? What I want to see? First, thank you so much. I believe that we are building a broad coalition that is not ideology and that we have supporting CAFA financial institutions, investors, civil society, policymakers aligning behind the principle that climate risk is financial risk. We want to construct engagement by knowing, by the knowledge, by what it's given by the evidence, by the science, and as a foundational framework. And we don't want to polarize. We want to follow what science and evidence is telling us. So we want CAFA to be a legal backbone for better disclosure, stronger governance, coherent policy alignment. CAFA should bring also clarity. We want to work with other institutions, including OSFI, which is our superintendent of financial institution. And we need to be clear. And also we want something that is practical in implementation. So the transition will happen by design or by disaster. CAFA is about choosing by design. This is not also about restricting capital. It's about, as I said, protecting our money. And if we align finance with reality, I'm sure that we will avoid paying much more in the future.
Senator Galvez, if I can jump on quickly to ask before we go to Julie to hear from her, what now is different from the current
Yes.
CAFA compared to before?
Thank you, Allison. Yes, thank you. So we were in a study in committee. We studied CAFA in committee during the last parliament, and we heard the concerns of different stakeholders, and they were around first on the capital risk weight requirement, and where CAFA was very prescriptive and imposing a given number. In this second version, we are asking OSFI to do what their mandate tells them, which is to evaluate and to assign an adequate capital risk requirement for entities. Also, in the first version of CAFA, we were fighting the conflict of interest in the boards because we heard so many, and still it is, there's a lot of people that are in boards and that don't declare and disclose their conflict of interest. And so we were mandating that the composition of boards should change. But now we are listening to the concerns, and we think that we will start with disclosure, and the governance, the individual governance of each entity should redress the situation. And the last amendment is concerning the duties of directors. So we have rewarded in order to be more in alignment with other legislations that tells what is the duty for officers and administrators and how should be aligned with the commitments. So there's 3 amendments to the new version of CAFA.
Thank you. Yeah, it's quite telling that, as a law is proposed and it's placed out in the public sphere, there is room for you as a senator or a lawmaker to respond to what you're hearing. And in a 4-year span, as we've seen geopolitical changes, climate policy changes, different asks from stakeholders, there is flexibility there as well in order to best respond to how to align our financial institutions to our climate commitments. Julie, I want to pose a question to you now in terms of what do you see is important for CAFA now and the path forward that you want to see?
Thanks, Allison. And Senator Galvez and Jessica's answers were really spot on. What I see as the importance of CAFA and why it's a valuable policy, there's 2 reasons, and they exist simultaneously. One of them is from the perspective of Canada's economy in the more traditional sense, and then one of them is from the perspective of mitigating climate change, protecting the things and places that we love and care about, moral obligation for climate justice. And those 2 things exist simultaneously. From the economic perspective, Canada is empirically behind other jurisdictions in terms of aligning our financial system with climate change. That puts us at a disadvantage in terms of the stated goals of this government to attract investment and grow the economy. So that's what this government under, since the last election has prioritized, attract investment, grow the economy. To do that, we should be aligned with those global trading partners. We should be creating the best structures to facilitate that. All of those other trading partners are more advanced on climate-related financial policy than Canada, EU, UK, Australia, many Asian economies. And we need to catch up to that. It's a regrettable thing to be lagging on. So that's from the economic perspective, the hard, clear idea that this government's put forward of growing the economy and attracting trade investment. We should be moving forward with policies that are included in the Climate Aligned Finance Act. And then the climate mitigation perspective is on its own so essential. Um, Jessica and Senator Galvez outlined this really quite well, where the financial system contributes to what our economy looks like. It shapes our lives, our consumer choices, the infrastructure that we live our days in. And if those aren't investing in positive investments, they're investing in harmful things, right? And we don't have the accountability over our financial system yet in Canada, which is very much what CAFA proposes to help advance climate action. And as part of that is also that without policies like those in the Climate Aligned Finance Act, our economy and financial system, and this is what kind of brings those two pieces together, our economy, financial system, and the way that we live our lives is unprepared for climate disruption. It's already happening. It already wreaks havoc on people's lives and on the Canadian economy overall. And the less we prepare for those climate disruptions, the harder it is. So the best way to reduce those climate risks is to ensure our financial system is aligned with contributing to reducing climate change.
Thanks, Julie. Your first point on the economy reminds me of Prime Minister Mark Carney's recent remarks around Canada's alignment with other middle powers. And when you speak of what other jurisdictions are doing with regards to their financial systems and climate, it is telling to compare Canada in that respect to other so-called middle powers. I think building on this, I want to go to Jessica in terms of you spoke to how you look at CAFA from the energy perspective and Canada being a fossil fuel economy. How do you see CAFA supporting goals of strengthening Canada and its competitiveness with really what's an alternative vision for a fossil fuel, what is historically a fossil fuel economy, it sounds like.
Yeah, well, just, to pick up on the Mark Carney comment with respect to middle powers, like business as usual is not usual anymore. And this is for a number of different reasons. Obviously, climate change, as Julie said, is really driving the truck, so to speak, in terms of the changes that are happening to our economy, to our communities. And then of course, economically, the, quote unquote, Trump effect has had like ripple effects across the economy, not only in terms of our direct trade, but also just in terms of our outlook as Canadians for what our future is. So, I think this is a key moment for Canada in terms of climate action and investment in national assets. And we've seen that there's an opportunity to be seized as the US backtracks from climate policy and ESG investing. Canada can provide a safe harbor for sustainability-minded investors, and we have to prepare the ground for that. Government's role is to recognize these opportunities for Canada and to act on them. We've seen commitments through major projects, the Climate Competitiveness Act, multi-billion-dollar defense announcements, seeking international investment from non-US trading partners. But recent polling is showing that Canadians want to build clean energy. The coming years are going to be so important for Canada, not only in terms of the implementation of these major projects and competitiveness strategies, but as Julie alluded to, it's even more critical for the climate. We are passing multiple thresholds and we need to take action immediately. Additionally, in terms of the competitiveness angle, Canada is going to have to be really careful about carbon lock-in. We already have extensive fossil fuel incumbencies and infrastructure throughout the country. Investing further in those assets is going to put us at risk. It was last year, IISD analysis did some stranded assets research and discovered that even under current policies, with nothing changing, 5% of new capital investment in Canadian oil and gas is going to be stranded. As the global demand trajectory moves away from fossil fuels and towards clean energy, that proportion of stranded assets, new fossil fuel assets in Canada is going to increase. So this is not a good investment. And we can see this in the sort of lackluster market take-up for things like pipelines, LNG investments in Canada, et cetera. CAFA is a broad and cohesive framework for aligning our financial sector behind our climate commitments. those climate commitments have material meaning for how Canada should be building and investing in additional fossil fuel infrastructure to meet our energy needs, to meet our trading partners' energy needs, is not climate aligned, is not economically aligned with where the puck is moving, so to speak. The other reason I would say CAFA is important and the principles of CAFA are important for competitiveness is, everyone else is doing it. As Julie said, our key trade partners are far ahead of us on this. The EU, the UK, Australia, and even the big behemoths like China are moving forward on disclosures, on transition plans, labeling and rules against greenwashing, having more public and more robust reporting. These are widely used by key trade partners and investors, and Canada is just simply not coordinated on this. It is a bit embarrassing, frankly, considering our global financial reputation. We need to catch up. And CAFA is really that, one-stop shop to align the entire field of federally regulated entities with what is quickly becoming the global norm. And finally, what I'll say about CAFA in terms of competitiveness for Canada is it is going to move us from laggard to leader. It's going to position us for the future. Senator Galvez referred to, the global market value for clean energy technology like wind, solar, electric vehicles, batteries, other green tech grew nearly fourfold between 2015 and 2023, and it's expected to triple by 2035 to more than $2 trillion. Yet, Canada's financial institutions invested over 1.4 trillion towards fossil fuel companies in 2022. So we're literally moving in the wrong direction. Canadian investments are moving in the wrong direction with respect to clean energy portfolios. So I think it's essential for Canadian financial institutions to look at where the puck is going in terms of clean energy investments and to start planning for that and putting that policy scaffolding in place to ensure our financial system stability.
Thanks, Jessica. If I could follow up and ask how do you feel like recent events, and namely the war in the Middle East, has really amplified where you see the puck is moving? I know you spoke to this a little bit at the beginning, but yeah, from how you're looking at it from an energy perspective and the role that CAFA plays, I'd love to hear you expand on that in light of recent geopolitical events.
Yeah, it is a regrettable situation we find ourselves in again. I would say that, historically, the way that we have thought about energy security needs to be challenged. And I think more and more people are coming around to this realization as we find ourselves in this loop, this continuous loop of war in the Middle East, price spikes on oil, trickle-down price increases, inflation, interest rate increases, and repeat. And it is happening in closer succession now, historically speaking, if you want to think about it that way. But the more crises we have like this creates this sort of polycrisis event. The easiest solution, and it's not easy, it will require a lot of work, but it's to start thinking about energy security in a different frame. Energy security can come from locally derived and established renewables, from battery storage, from better transmission, better planning overall. Clean, renewable electricity is, in the long term, cheaper for consumers. And it's more stable for the economy. And it helps all of our businesses and our entire industrial system decarbonize when we have a good, solid base of clean energy infrastructure within the country that doesn't require import and export. So that, for me, feels more secure in the long run than doubling down on oil and gas infrastructure that just keeps us tied to that sort of old business model, frankly.
Thanks, Jessica. Julie, I want to turn to you, and we've talked a little bit now about the energy piece to CAFA, but let's think a little bit more about the climate piece to CAFA, and it's named the Climate Aligned Finance Act. From your perspective, how does CAFA contribute to decarbonization, climate justice, and climate policy in Canada?
Thanks, Allison. Well, I think the middle part there about climate justice is also quite important because decarbonization doesn't always mean that. And I know many of the attendees on this webinar are interested in that type of perspective and are working on climate policy from a broader perspective. So I think having some rules of the game, which CAFA puts forward for the financial sector, is really important to make sure that we are advancing in decarbonization in a way that makes sense for our society at large. Jessica covered so many great things in the last answer, and I'm grateful for two pieces, one of which is introducing a hockey metaphor of going where the puck is. And I think the other important piece is we need a referee. And that's kind of what CAFA is doing, right? We need rules of the game. We need a referee to enforce those. That's why CAFA talks about mandates for regulators. That's why CAFA puts in a system of rules to consider how climate policy and financial policy relate to each other. So I think on the decarbonization piece and the energy transition, Jessica covered that perfectly. But then when we're thinking of a broader societal transformation through, which is naturally happening exogenously through climate change and through the energy transition, we need to make sure that our systems are operating the way that we want them to for that end goal. And as I mentioned in my initial answer, also to deal with the disruptions that climate change is causing. For example, with the rise of climate change, insurance is becoming more expensive for homeowners, while insurers are still investing in oil and gas companies and other contributors to climate change. So those are some of the problems that need to be reflected and considered in designing climate policy, and that CAFA tackles really well in thinking about how do we not just move money from A to B, polluting to green, but also how do we do that in a way that provides more democratic accountability over the financial system, which is something that I personally find very exciting, and I know most folks engaged in this topic understand to be a key important part.
That segues well into my next question for the three of you, which is, from your perspective, which of CAFA's core policies do you think is the most important? Maybe Senator Galvez, we can start with you.
Sure. Maybe you can put the slide with the 7 action points. But if not, I can just summarize them very quickly.
I'll put that up now, Senator Galvez, so everyone
Okay.
can see what you're picking your favorite from.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Julie. So, of course, I like the 7 action, of course, and they are equally important. But in this context, you asked me to pick one. So I will pick the number 3. CAFA requires financial institutions to set clear climate alignment objective. We need transition plan, and that these transition plans needs to be credible and embedding those plans into the governance, into the strategy, and into the risk management. So it's like saying, enough with the pledges. Pledges are not enough. We need operational roadmaps. Disclosing is not enough. We need accountability at the board level. I think that CAFA moves climate from reporting, from a reporting exercise to actually a decision-making requirement. And in such way, it becomes a very, very important lever in, for example, changing the behavior of entities and for transparency, for coherency, for competitiveness, for innovation, for productivity. And just to complete what Jessica was saying, one question that Canadians should ask is, how is it possible that we are a net oil exporter, the price of oil in Canada has increased 10 cents the liter in just few weeks? So why is this? And this is because we are price takers of the oil. There is a cartel defining what is the price. We export 98% of our crude oil to our neighbor. And our neighbor in Texas and in New Orleans, they refine it and then they send it back. We sell it for $42 a barrel, and they convert it, refine it into jet fuel, into diesel, and they sell it back at $300 a barrel. This cannot continue like this. Our prime minister is going around the world looking for investments, and he's looking into jurisdictions that have a stricter sustainable finance regulation. Just as an example, Europe with its carbon adjustment tax at the border, and we want our products to compete with other people that has other jurisdiction that has better and stricter sustainable finance rules. I think we are, shooting in our feet, and instead of asking our banks, our insurance, our pension plans to align with our commitments, align with what we have passed as acts, as law that are now. And so I think that we have the net zero 2050, which I helped the government to pass. We are very far from attaining our goals. So we need transition plans, and CAFA has it in number 3. I think it connects long-term goals with short-term decisions. We need to know what is happening in 5 years, in 7 years, in 10 years, not only in 2050. And with respect to capital allocation, with respect to lending practices, with respect to new portfolios, and this has to be in a very transparent way. I know that right now clients, people that have investment, ask banks, how can I invest responsibly? And they are keep pushing some portfolios that keep, as Jessica said, investing $4 in the old technology when the new technology is providing with more return. So I am already saying that they are not doing a good job, because when we look into the returns of renewable energy in nature-based solutions, the return is between $8 and $15, and some people are saying even $30 per dollar, and we are not telling this to the clients. So I think that that's CAFA, and also these transition plans delivers real decarbonization because it redirects capital flow, because it reduces systemic risk, because it creates this accountability that we need and this transparency. And I think by doing all of that, I think that influences market and it improves market discipline. So I don't know if you cut me, because if you give me the mic, I can go forever. So if I have 1 more minute, I can talk a little bit more. You let me know, Allison.
Thanks, Senator Galvez. Jessica, Julie, tough to follow which which of the CAFA is your pick in terms of being the most important, but I would love to hear your perspectives.
Yeah, so I think that to continue on the energy issue is that it is well known by everybody, an expert in energy is saying that when your economy is based in oil and gas, well, it's inflationary. Every single thing increases in price, every single thing. On the contrary, when you rely your economy on renewable energy, is deflationary, because you become independent of all this cartel that sets the price for that. Mm-hmm. Another very important issue is economy based on the petrodollar that it's becoming more and more important given the geopolitical situation in which we are. So we are talking about the debt of the United States, our debt too, and increasing our debt, and trying to find competitiveness in a sector that is sunsetting. That is a little bit illogical. That's really very dangerous because the competitiveness and the innovation and the productivity is not in the sector that is sunsetting, is in sectors that are growing and becoming cheaper in time. And we have to, it has to be coherent and holistic, and that's why all the other aspects of CAFA are so important, because it makes the framework complete. We used to say CAFA is the piece of the puzzle that is missing, but I think that the puzzle needed different pieces, and what CAFA is doing is trying to make coherent and holistic the way we push towards this transition where the puck is actually going and flying right now.
Yeah.
I think I agree with you, Senator Galvez, on transition plans being one of the key pieces here. Of course, CAFA was deliberately put forward as a cohesive package of policies. However, transition plans are something that other jurisdictions are doing and that are super foundational. Um, I think one piece to note would be, again, that other jurisdictions, other partners have moved forward with that. Uh, Canada is one of the only jurisdictions that I can think of who has committed to sustainable finance policy that doesn't have anything in terms of fundamental reporting on your climate risks. Disclosure in itself, saying, here's my pollution, here are my risks, does not change them necessarily. That's a foundation most other places have and that Canada doesn't yet. However, a transition plan does. It's saying, think about climate not from your marketing, not from your legal team, but from your business strategy.
Mm-hmm.
How are you reducing your emissions and reducing your climate risk? So I think with more time, we could certainly get into some of the other pieces here. However, transition plans is one that I think can be moved forward. Um, I think I know what Jessica's favorite one, and so I'll lead into that by saying, before passing it over, I'll lead into that by saying that another piece of policy that Canada is one of the few jurisdictions to not have is clarifying that our regulators have a mandate already to consider climate change. So the UK Treasury, Australia Treasury, European Union have all clarified that mandates of regulators include considering climate change while maintaining their independence. But Canada's an anomaly on not having done that, which is proposed in CAFA. So over to you, Jessica.
Yeah, it's tough to pick a favorite in this one, but I think the one that stands out for me in the Canadian context especially is around mandate alignment, aligning the purpose of our institutions, our financial entities with climate commitments. This makes those institutions and their CEOs responsible for how their business activities impact the public good, not just private profits or the private good. This, to me, seems like a reasonable price for doing business in Canada. I know we talk about federally regulated entities, but I want to pivot just briefly to provincial entities because I have an interesting example about this mandate alignment from my home province of Manitoba, and I'm based in Winnipeg on Treaty 1 territory. So Manitoba, we may or may not know, has announced a path to net zero. Affordable energy plan has been doing a lot of thinking around the future of energy in Manitoba. And as part of that thinking, they've announced an intention to align key energy crown corporations such as Manitoba Hydro, Efficiency Manitoba, and the Public Utilities Board, although not a crown corporation, with net zero goals. And we can debate the definition of that, but let's take this as a positive step forward. As a province that's already rich in hydroelectricity, about 97% of our power comes from hydroelectric, this is a good market strategy. You want to align your strong clean energy corporation with climate-aligned goals and decision-making for the future. But until that mandate is aligned, what we're encountering is this short-sighted thinking. For example, we've just seen Manitoba Hydro and the Public Utilities Board announce approving expansion for the use of natural gas, thermal combustion in the province, as the most affordable option for meeting peak demand needs. But what happens when those natural gas prices are hit by another geopolitical shockwave? At the same time, we're hearing rumors locally about, pipelines to Churchill as a way to bolster global energy security. These are prophecies for a future that doesn't exist anymore. So mandate alignment with climate goals is going to ensure that decision-making takes that longer-term view into consideration while coming up with corporate solutions thinking towards clean energy technology. So mandate alignment for me is up there as one of the most important things. It's really about saying what you mean. If we mean that we are committed to climate, we have to say that in our mandates and move forward on that. I'll maybe just stop there in the interest of time so we can move forward.
Thank you, everyone. I'm coming up near to the end of my question, so I'll just flag to the audience that if you do have questions, please feel free to start dropping them in the question and answer function here on the webinar. But before we close out, I do have a few more. So I think one thought that I have in mind is regarding what the future of CAFA looks like, and at a pragmatic level, what are the pathways for CAFA to move forward and become law? So Julie and Jessica, I'll pass it over to you for your thoughts on that.
I don't know, Julie, do you want to start off on this? Or you want me to take a run?
You can continue. I'll follow after.
Sure. I'm already unmuted, so I will continue. Right. So, I mean, the bill itself has had its second reading, and its next stop will be the committee. It hasn't been recommended to committee yet officially. But it is making its way through that process. I personally would also like to see something in the budget, the 2026 budget. We're in that process now. Now we're in a fall budget cycle, and so the consultation and thinking process is already underway for budget 2026. So I think at a minimum, we would want to see a restating and perhaps expansion on existing disclosure requirements for one. And calling on regulators to clarify the climate commitments that we have. Last budget we saw some disclosure requirements introducing mandatory disclosure of clean growth and climate contributions from national interest projects. So in other words, the federal government is it's sort of taking baby steps to build climate and clean growth performance into its major projects thinking and economic agenda. But these are just baby steps, and they don't amount to a plan for the financial sector. So I would like to see stronger mandate alignment for federal entities, especially those involved in some of these major infrastructure projects. I think that would send a clearer and more credible market signal that sustainability is a long-term core business for Canada. I think that will go a long way towards attracting the investment that the country is seeking. And I'd love to see more MPs stand up behind this in the House or even in their own constituencies to talk about the importance of aligning our financial sector with climate action.
Super. I completely agree with the importance of moving some pieces forward in the budget, which is the next policy the big policy document that the House of Commons, part of the federal government, tends to move forward with. It's kind of a two-path thing where Canada's Parliament has two levels: the House of Commons, where we elect MPs, and then the Senate, where Senator Galvez is sitting appointed. And so moving CAFA forward in the Senate is super important. When it was initially introduced, it went forward to a really great debate in committee study where the bill was able to be discussed and improved. So it should continue to move forward in the Senate, likely through the banking committee there. And it's very important to move forward in the House of Commons too. And moving forward on those two paths are possible and is a way to get initial pieces of CAFA to move forward while still encouraging through the Senate the full package cohesively. Uh, in terms of what can be done or what I anticipate, what I would like to see and anticipate could be done in the House of Commons. Uh, a couple of years ago, a number of members of parliament supported a motion to align the financial system with climate action. That received dozens of MPs supporting it from across four of the main parties. It would be great to see that similar type of initiative continue from a number of the members of parliament who are equally engaged in and committed to a climate aligned financial system. So that would be super to advance both in the spirit of the members of parliament and then the policies coming through in the budget, which is moved forward by those ambitious members of parliament to see mandatory transition plans as part of climate related disclosures in a 2026 federal budget across the financial institutions that are regulated by the federal government. That's really what I would love to see. Mandatory transition plans as part of climate related disclosures while CAFA continues to push forward. One piece that is worth mentioning is that a number of MPs in this parliament did support the Climate Aligned Finance Act, and that momentum has continued. In the House of Commons, there's different committees who study different areas, and the Environment Committee, which is a cross-partisan committee, put forward a really detailed study on climate-related financial risks and how the financial system is contributing to climate change. They had dozens of people testify for that. I had the pleasure of being able to contribute to that study. Their top recommendation as members of parliament was to support the advancement of the Climate Aligned Finance Act. So there's a couple of different pathways, but my answer in short is that it's great to have the full package of CAFA move forward in the Senate, and that should be supported and advanced, as well as the opportunity to bring forward some of those bigger chunks through the House of Commons and through pieces of policy like the federal budget.
Before we turn to audience questions, I would love to hear from Senator Galvez in terms of next steps. When we look to the end of the year, the next 9 months, what do you think people who support CAFA, perhaps watching this webinar, what should they do when it comes to actioning on that support through to the end of the year?
Yes. So first, just to reinforce what Julie just said, is that the elected chamber, I'm not elected, I'm appointed, but the elected chamber, we have had great support coming from the elected chamber through Motion 84 and through the ENVI committee. That should send a very strong message to the senators saying, we have to follow what the elected representative want. But as I mentioned earlier, I want to build a visible, independent, non-partisan support. And so in that sense, I thank you so much to you guys to organize this event, which shows that the NGOs, some investors, like academics, we have a lot of academics supporting our work. And I'm happy to say that when I initiated this, Motion 84 was not there, the ENVI committee was not studying this, and it was considered as a niche or very selected people of experts talking about sustainable finances. And so now it's open in the air, in the space, and everybody knows that this is very important and that actually it's a big barrier if our financial sector doesn't move in the direction of a low carbon economy and aligning their mandates with our commitments. So I think there is a political momentum, as we said before. It is needed more than ever because of the geopolitical situation in which we have. So what I would like people to do is to, engage directly with senators and with MPs. Of course, the senators that sit in the banking committee are of special importance. You can write petitions, you can organize your groups and send requests so to accelerate the process. we were told that bills that die in the order of paper during the last parliament were going to be brought back to the same stage. It's not the case for CAFA, so we have to push for that. I think that we have the science and the evidence and the facts behind us. And so talking about this is very important to convince. It's not ideology. These are facts. And so we have to demonstrate that we need to manage risk and we have opportunities for competitive, increase our competitiveness. So yes, continue engaging directly with your MPs at your local level, ask questions and talk about their initiative, the motion or the study. And yes, and I'm happy to be present in any invitation to keep talking about CAFA.
Thanks, Senator Galvez, and thanks everyone. I'll turn to audience questions now. I'll answer this one I'll pose actually this one asked by Jane here, which is how do you resolve the conflicts in jurisdiction between CAFA and OSFI and provincial securities regulators, really pointing to the complex regulatory dynamic that we have here in Canada, where we have 13 different securities regulators for each province and territory. Yeah, how do you see CAFA engaging with this landscape?
Yeah, so CAFA, it harmonizes this and actually it tells everybody, let's be pulled by the high, not by the lowest. Let's put this threshold. And so all the provinces can align to that. We have in provinces such as British Columbia and Quebec, we have very interesting movement in the direction of CAFA, and they are already, actually entities are already doing what CAFA is mandating, but we are a nation, we are a country, and so our commitment is as a nation. So if we want everybody to move, we need to have legislation such as CAFA that says at the federal level, and start with the federally regulated institutions and entities to implement what we say in other acts.
Yeah,
Maybe I could add that just that in my 10 years here as a senator, what I can see is that we know some provinces are leaders in certain sectors, and that the federal will look at what these provinces are doing it and try to bring similar legislations to put it horizontally and regulate everybody through this leadership legislations that are ongoing in provinces.
If I could just add 2 cents to the provincial question, because this is an area that I am especially interested in, and we'll be doing some research in for the coming year. This is a great question. Canada has a very particular form of federalism where our provinces have quite a bit of authority, quite a bit of autonomy, and they flex that authority and autonomy as they should. However, as they say, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. Each of these provinces is facing fiscal crunches, energy capacity and energy supply questions. We hear across the country about the need to pull in private finance because government can't pay for everything. And so the principles of CAFA and climate alignment work for the provinces just as well as they work for the federal government. And so I think, as time goes on and these provincial budgetary crunches come in with additional costs like wildfire expenditures, flooding, astronomical and rising costs of climate change, provinces are going to have to start doing their business differently as well. And as Senator Galvez mentioned, provinces are already becoming live to this subject and starting to talk about it. So I think there's room for everybody to come along.
On the provinces versus federal piece, it's super important to note that CAFA touches on the federal pieces because that's, the area that the Senate can engage in. When we were talking about pieces that the House of Commons can move forward with, like in the budget, mandating transit, requiring mandatory transition plans, that's also something that would tackle federally regulated financial institutions. OSFI, the Office of Superintendent of Financial Institutions, the main regulator in Canada, and they tackle that federal level as well. The securities, which are our stock markets, those are regulated provincially. So a lot of the public companies are regulated provincially. Some companies are regulated federally. Um, and it's a bit of a dance. I mean, that's just how Canada works as a federation. To be honest, if we're looking around the country, I don't think that the fragmentation of finance is the biggest challenge in the federation these days. In the sense of the federal government can do what it can do, and it should move ahead with those pieces. And the provincial governments and regulators are looking at their pieces too. There is some fragmentation in Canada, certainly. Part of that fragmentation can be because of the dispersed regulatory structure. Although, again, it's kind of the nature of being in a federation of provinces that are together a country. And I think there's bigger challenges amongst that federation. When it comes to climate-related finance, coordination is super important. However, at this point, either the provinces or the federal government just need to get going, and then we'll make it work.
Got one last question here from Andrea, which is a little bit more on the philosophical side, but perhaps an interesting note to end on. And Andrea is asking if fossil fuels are only 2 to 2.5% of the Canadian economy, are we really, as Canada, a fossil fuel economy, or have we just been convinced of this by the industry? And I'll caveat that on my end, personally, I don't quite know what the stats are regarding fossil fuels and GDP, but perhaps take this question of Canada as of fossil fuels is one component of Canada's economy as a whole. So would be great to hear three of you's thoughts on that image of Canada as a fossil fuel economy or not.
I can jump into this one quickly before passing to others. It's a great question because recent research has shown uh, a relatively low job rate from the oil and gas sector. It does contribute some royalties to the country, certainly in terms of tax base, in terms of the economy. You're right, there are so many other important sectors. It does punch above its weight in terms of contribution to our emissions, certainly. I think the data that stands out most acutely to me is that job rates have been going down in that. And so, that's really what we want to think about as we're building our economy. Are people relying on this? So when I think it was either Jessica or Senator Galvez referred to Canada as a fossil fuel economy, the way I personally hear that is more considering, whether our policies are unduly influenced by that, regardless of, as this question points out, the contribution to different data points of our economy, and of course the opportunity for quite a bit of transition.
I can continue and say a couple of points. So first is that the atmosphere is just one. And you said you talk about philosophy. This is not philosophy, it's fact. The atmosphere is one. So if we export petroleum, we may not burn it here in Canada, but our petroleum is being burned all around the world. And we declare our scope 1, sometimes scope 2, and definitely not a scope 3. And so there is not a whole accountability of the role of the fossil fuel in our economy and in with respect to our commitments. Second, we always say that the role of the government is not to choose winners or losers, but we do, because we give billions of subsidies every year. We construct a pipeline for the sector, and we give it as a gift. And we are not going to recuperate this money in the next 50 years. And actually, it just reminds me something about this budget, in which this budget we are changing the terminology, and we are calling investment everything in order to appear that subsidies and some operational costs are considered as investment, and that's wrong, and that's not accepted by the international accounting system. And my question in national finances was this: we just paid a pipeline, and you are considering this as an investment, but we know that it's not going to produce any revenue. So we are choosing winners and losers, and the last point about that is that with respect to the royalties that Julie mentioned, when we compare the magnitude of the royalties that we charge to other people, because 90% of the oil corporations in Canada doesn't belong to Canadians. It belongs to international and especially the Americans. And we don't charge the same level of royalties. So it is a very distorted, not free market at all. And so again, if we say we are all for free market, well, okay, so then let's be for free market. And in that sense, renewable energy is a very robust sector that grew by itself without any assistance.
I'll just add quickly because I know we're at time, but in terms of fossil fuel dependency, yeah, absolutely. I think the fossil fuel industry has had its thumb on the scale, so to speak, for quite a bit of time. Canada's been financing fossil fuels for decades. It's climate's turn now. And I would say too, in terms of fossil fuel dependency, from a consumer perspective, we are still very dependent on fossil fuels for our domestic energy systems, or transportation, heating, etc. CAFA is not just about aligning investment for international competition. It is also about investment for improving the energy systems and well-being of Canadians. And I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind in terms of what finance can do for Canada. I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Jessica. Yeah, that's a great way to round out today's conversation. I want to thank our panelists, Julie, Jessica, and Senator Galvez, as well as our host, Environmental Defense, for having and hosting this conversation today. Please take a look at the links we've shared in the chat as the recording will be posted, and feel free to share widely with your networks. I think one big takeaway that I have from my end is really that CAFA is a financial framework that's proposing a different, more competitive climate economy. And the key word on that climate economy, it's an economy, climate at the center, not necessarily an afterthought. I'll invite everyone to continue following CAFA's progress from Environmental Defense Canada, Senator Galvez, IISD, and Carbon Pulse as well in the next few months. And we look forward to engaging with you on CAFA again in the near future. Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thank you so much.
Have a good day.
Thank you.